Hey everybody, Melon here, and welcome back to another edition of Teardown. Today we are going to be doing a teardown of the new Stormbreaker BLG edition, or the Stormbreaker Platinum edition, or also known as the Stormbreaker V2. Now, the Stormbreaker V1 was a fairly serviceable mouse. It did have a couple unique twists to the inside because some of the ribbon cables were a little difficult to get back in, but overall it is a pretty easy to service mouse, which was great to see on that unit, and I'm hoping the same is going to be here on the V2, even with its improvements. A lot of the mouse did stay the same, so I think it's going to be pretty similar, but today we're going to find out just how similar the disassembly process is and how easy it is to service the Stormbreaker V2. Now, before we get into this, you will need a couple things. A precision screwdriver set is highly recommended, as some of the screws inside here are quite tiny, so having precision bits is going to make this significantly easier. Also, having somebody to keep track of your screws, like an ice cube tray or pretty much whatever you want, is also highly advisable, just so you don't mix up any of your screws. And having a microfiber cloth to help keep the mouse in place while you do your teardown is also highly advised. But once you have all that, you're ready to tear down your Stormbreaker V2, so let's go ahead and get right into it. Alright, now first off, you have to go ahead and remove these stock skates on the bottom of your Stormbreaker. I've already gone ahead and removed the two on the base here. You don't need to remove the top ones, but just because the stock skates are kind of lackluster, I'd recommend removing them as a whole. But once you remove the stock skates and you can get access to these two access screws right here, we can go ahead and remove those. And then once you have those off, what you can do is you can just put your fingers on the side of the Stormbreaker right here, and the back shell will pop open just a little bit, and with a little bit of pressure, you should be able to separate the shells. Now, the top and bottom shells are clipped into the front of the mouse by two clips right here. So what you need to do is you need to kind of pull the top shell down and off just like that, and then you can take the shells apart. Now, keep in mind there is a ribbon cable on the inside here, so just don't rip the shells off the top. Flip the unit over and very carefully take two of your fingers and pull up on this little connector here, and you can gently wiggle the ribbon cable out of its connector, just like that, and now you can separate the top and the bottom shells of the Stormbreaker V2. Now, I'm going to put the base aside for later. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about this top shell first. Now, in regards to the top shell, just like there was in the Stormbreaker V1, there really isn't too much to do here. The only thing we can really do is remove the side button PCB here for the screw. So there is one screw right here, so we'll go ahead and remove that. And then once that's out, you can gently lift out this PCB by just literally grabbing the sides of it right here, and it will just pull right out of its connector. And then here we have our side button PCB with the blue dot micro switches here. We'll put this off to the side for later. And then next up, we can go ahead and remove these side buttons. Now, the side buttons are pretty straightforward. All we do is take two of your fingers and just press them into the side of the shell like this, and then just literally just pull up on the sides of the shell here, and they pop right out of their little rest just like that. Again, these are the plastic side buttons, but they're much less tense than they were in the V1, which is why the side buttons are so much easier to actuate. So that's a great change that I praised a lot in my review of the Stormbreaker V2, but we'll put these off to the side for now. And lastly, we have this one screw in the middle here. Now, we can go ahead and remove this. Just be very careful though. This screw is often pretty tight because it's factory tensioned. So don't strip the screw. Just make sure you take your time and just slowly undo it. And then now we can pull off this top part of the shell here that just pulls straight up. It's lined in by these little columns that go into the hole here, and here, so you can just pull this straight off just like you could on the original Stormbreaker. And we can do the same thing for the main clicks, but the main clicks are a little different. See these two little stabilizers here? You have to kind of peel the clicks off the stabilizers to get them off. So you just kind of get a fingernail under there, pull them off, and then you pull the clicks straight out and over, and they'll fall out of the shell just like they did on the original Stormbreaker. And that is pretty much everything for the top shell of the Stormbreaker. One great attention to detail though is that PWNAGE has put these little rubber pads on the bottom of the main clicks on both sides to prevent any unnecessary sound from the metal clanging against each other, which is a great attention to detail. And these little pads haven't caused any kind of sticky click issues, which is great to see. Overall, the top shell is just as repairable as it was in the original Stormbreaker, which is fantastic to see. We'll put the top shell off to the side for now, and now we can go ahead and talk about the base shell. Now, the base shell is pretty much one for one with the original Stormbreaker, so not really too much going on here. First thing, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and disconnect this battery connector. So you just want to get your fingers on the side of this connector and just gently wiggle it off, just like that. And then we also have this ribbon cable for the adjustable sensor that will extend and kind of bunch back up where, depending on where the sensor position is. Now, you will need to remove this cable, but I recommend removing it from the sensor side, not from the board side. So to do this is pretty much the same process as it was for this little one right here. Basically, just take two of your fingers, pop off the side into the open position like that, and then just gently pull the cable out just like that. Now that's done, we can go ahead and remove the four anchoring screws for the main boards. There's a screw here, 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 and here. All right, and then once you've removed those pieces, you can go ahead and grab on the side of the main clicks here and just pull straight up, and the board comes off from the base shell of the Stormbreaker V2. Now, you can also remove the scroll wheel, which is pretty easy to do. So you just want to grab the scroll wheel and just pull it out of the encoder just like that, and it slides off very easily. We'll put that off to the side for now. Now, in regards to this PCB here, now this is on a little slider rail that works for the adjustable sensor here on the Stormbreaker. I would actually advise leaving this intact, as if you remove these screws, you may mess up with the actual tensioning of the sensor, and it may affect the LODs on the sensor. So I would not remove it from this PCB unless you absolutely have to. Better to leave it intact just to make sure you don't cause any problems with your board. Now, before we move on, I wanted to give a quick little rundown of the board we have here. So here we have the Omron main switches that I talked about in my full review. We have that Kale pillar switch for the main click. We have the TTC 13mm encoder, and then we also have our Nordic 52840 MCU, and of course we have the 3395 sensor on the separate PCB here. All right, well, that's pretty much everything for the disassembly process here. Let's go ahead and weigh all these components next. All right, now in terms of component weights here in the Stormbreaker, I'm going to weigh the base with the PCB on it and the battery also installed. So keep in mind the weight's going to be a little heavier than it will be for a normal base, but that's because there's some extra pieces on here. I did remove the stock skates though, just so you're not going to have that extra weight. But the base with all the extra pieces included is coming in around 18.7 grams. Again, this is split between all these different components here. I would remove them, but again, I don't want to mess up the sensor and I don't want to mess up the adhesion of the battery. So just keep in mind it's probably more like 10 grams, 6 grams, 2 grams, but it'll vary a little bit depending on the unit. And then in terms of the main PCB, this one is coming in at around 8.5 grams, which is quite a good weight for an adjustable sensor board like this, which is great to see. The scroll wheel itself is weighing in at around 1.3 grams. The side buttons are weighing in at around 1.8 grams. The top shell frame without any buttons or screws is weighing in at around 12.05 grams. The main clicks are weighing in at around 4.5 grams. The back shell part here is weighing in around 3.8 grams. And the side button PCB is weighing in just under a gram at 0.94 grams. All right, well, now that we've weighed all the individual components of the Stormbreaker, let's go ahead and start the reassembly process. Now, the first part of the reassembly process is going to be putting in this scroll wheel back into the PCB here. Now, basically what happens is that this tiny little piece here goes into this hole in the encoder. So you just want to gently line it up as best you can and just gently push it in. Now, very important note here, don't push it in all the way. You want to leave a little bit of a gap just like that, which I'll explain why in a moment. Next up, we can go ahead and put this PCB back into the main board. To do this, all you have to do is line up the scroll wheel with these standoffs here for the scroll wheel at the top of the board. So just gently line it up and put it over like this. Now, the reason why we didn't put the scroll wheel all the way in is because there's a little plastic piece that has to go in between this wheel and the encoder itself. So once the board is flush with the rest of the PCB, you can tell this by the plastic being kind of equal to the level of the PCB here. You can go ahead and just push this scroll wheel all the way back in, however far it will go. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and put back in our anchoring screws. All right, and now that we've done that, we can go ahead and put back in this ribbon cable. Now this is going to be a little tricky. I'm going to do my best to show you how to do this. The best thing to do is to open this up like this into the open position, and it's very important you want to keep it in this open position because you have to thread this tiny little ribbon cable into the opening here without hitting any of this black part here, because that will close the connector. So you may have to kind of roughly put it in and then open this again. But once you get it roughly in, you can see how the blue kind of disappears behind this connector. And then once that's done, you want to take your finger and just kind of press on the top just to make sure it's even, and then clip on both of these side parts just like this, and it should be good. Now, one very important thing to do is see how it's a little bit uneven there. I have to reseat it because if this little ribbon cable is uneven, it's not going to make proper contact with some of the contacts inside, which means your sensor will malfunction. So it's very important to make sure that this little blue piece is as even as possible to the rest of the board. See, it's much better now. If you go ahead and do a disassembly and you notice your sensor's acting up, it's most likely because this ribbon cable isn't seated properly. So make sure this blue piece is even and make sure that it's fully seated into this connector. Again, I really don't like ribbon connectors for this exact reason because they're very difficult to get in. I would much rather see like a 3-pin connector like this, as that would be much easier, but it is what it is. All right, and now that the ribbon cable is back in, we can go ahead and reconnect our battery connector. All we're going to do is just gently line this up over this connector here. Once you get it roughly in, just put your fingers on the sides and push down. Now, what I'd recommend at this point is I'd recommend flicking on your Stormbreaker and just double check to make sure the sensor is functioning and making sure the unit is working. Check your scroll wheel, check your main clicks, just triple check everything before we go forward, because if there's an issue with this ribbon cable now, it's easiest to reseat it now rather than later in the reassembly process. But once you've tested to make sure everything is still functioning fine, you are good to go. So we can go ahead, flick our Stormbreaker back off, and we'll put the base off to the side for now. We'll focus on the top shell next. Now, the top shell is actually a very, very easy repair. Normally main clicks are a little tricky to get back into the shell, but here in the Stormbreaker, they're actually incredibly easy to do. So all you want to do is just take these stabilizers and you want to basically just put them into the front of the shell, just like this. Literally just kind of hover them over just like that. That's pretty much it. And then you can flip the mouse over and see how it naturally lines up over these standoffs. Put your finger on the bottom and clip these into place. Now, one very, very important thing, you want to make sure these are really in there. So I'd press very hard on the top here to make sure they are in, put a little bit of weight on the bottom and just press on the top and make sure these are all the way in just to make sure they're anchored properly. All right, and then once that's done, take the top shell and put that back on. And once you have it roughly lined up, it should just sink right into place just like that. And then what you need to do is, it's very important for this part, do not touch the main clicks, because if you touch the main clicks, you may slightly loosen them from their standoffs. You have to flip the unit over while putting a little bit of pressure on this top shell piece here. And you want to flip it over and put it against something soft like this and press down to make sure nothing moves. Again, don't press on the main clicks because you could loosen them from their connection. And then you want to take this anchoring screw and put it back in on the central piece here. Now, I would recommend screwing this in quite snugly, as this piece is holding in your main clicks, and if you under tighten them, there may be issues with the actuation rate or the rebound on these. So just make sure you tighten this screw as best as you can without stripping the screw. But once you've got that done, next up we can go ahead and put back in our side buttons. This is going to be very easy. All we do is literally just kind of roughly put them into the shell as best you can. And then you just want to raise them up and make sure they go into these little standoffs up at the top. You may have to pull it out and kind of bend it around, but it's plastic, so don't worry about it too much. And once they're clicked in, they'll roughly sit in just like that. Just make sure you can still press the buttons, they still rebound, and if they do, you're good to go. So that's pretty much everything for the top shell. Now, normally what I would say is I would go ahead and put back in the side button PCB. We're actually not going to do that just because this connector is so short. We're actually going to do this a little differently. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to connect this onto the main board first, and then we're going to install this into the top shell just to make it easier, because getting this tiny cable into this tiny little connector with the top shell is very, very difficult. So how we're going to do this is same process as the ribbon cable. We're going to go ahead and open up this connector here just like that, and you want to make sure it sits in the open position as best you can. Sometimes these will kind of tilt like that. It's pretty common. Just try and keep it open as best you can. And then you want to take this connector with the blue side out and feed it into that tiny little slot on the board. Again, this is very difficult to show, so just bear with me here. But if you're lucky, you should be able to get it in just like that. And then what I would recommend is take your fingernail and just kind of grab the top of this blue piece and just push it down as best you can. Don't push down to the top of the cable. You just want to kind of hook onto that blue piece there, press it down as best you can. And then once it's roughly seated in, just press down this clip. Again, just like we talked about with the main sensor, make sure this blue piece is roughly even with this. If it's misaligned, it will most likely misactuate and cause problems with the side buttons. So it's very important to make sure that that is roughly even with the rest of the board, but it is in our case, so we're good to go. So now we have to go ahead and put this into the shell, which seems like a very daunting task, but bear with me, it's actually pretty easy. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of meet the shells together like this. It's best to put the shell down. And then once you have the shells kind of like this, you can go ahead and put this into its little connector here. Now I'm going to try and show you as best I can on the camera here. I'm sorry if it cuts off. It's kind of hard to show this. Okay. And once you have it roughly lined into the connector there, that's good to go. And then you can go ahead and take your anchoring screw and just put a finger on top here just to make sure it's being held down and re-screw this in. Make sure it's nice and tight. And then what you want to do is you just want to put the shells loosely together like this and just check your side clicks. Make sure they still actuate. Again, I'd recommend flicking your unit on and just making sure the side buttons are actuating. If they're not actuating, reseat this cable because it may have come loose while we were trying to put it in. But if you followed the instructions and you did it carefully, everything should be fine. Everything should be functional. And then you can go ahead and put the shells back together. Now, keep in mind they are clipped in from the top, so you can see the little clips there, and they correspond to the little clips in the top magnesium shell there. So you kind of have to sandwich the front half of the shell together like this. And then with a little bit of pressure, you can click it all back together just like that. Just run your finger along the sides of the mouse to make sure there are no loose spots. And once that's done, you can go ahead and put back in your 2 anchoring screws for the base shell. And once those screws are put back in, that is everything for the teardown here for the PWNAGE Stormbreaker. Overall, a very serviceable mouse. The only tricky parts about this mouse are the ribbon cables, but we had the exact same situation on the previous Stormbreaker, so this is kind of expected at this point. Again, I would love PWNAGE to use maybe tri-tip connectors or maybe longer connectors, so it's not as difficult to get the side button PCB in specifically. But overall, the Stormbreaker V2 is just as serviceable as the Stormbreaker V1, which is great to see, and not a lot has really changed in terms of the internal construction, which is great. So it's still a very, very simple to service mouse. This is actually very important specifically for an open shell mouse like this, because if you have pets, pet hair, dust, and that kind of stuff is eventually going to fill this unit up because it is a non-solid shell. So having this mouse be very easy to open and very easy to service to clean it out is great to see. But that's going to be everything for today's episode of Teardown. Thank you very much for watching. As always, I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed the teardown and want to see more teardowns like this of all the other mice I cover here on the channel, be sure to get subscribed and leave a like on this video. Thank you very much to our channel members members, Yuki89, Prince, It Was Luck, and Lunaris for helping support the channel and helping make these teardowns possible. If you'd like to support what I do here on the channel with the Teardown project and all the in-depth reviews on the channel, you can become a member here on YouTube. It is only $2 Canadian, and that is the best way to support the channel. You can also help support the channel by using code MELON with a 0 over at Lethal Gaming Gear, Potent Gaming Gear, Mech Keys, TJ Exclusives, and a couple other retailers to save yourself some money on your orders and help support the channel. But that's everything for this episode of Teardown. Thank you very much for watching again. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of Teardown. Peace.